This is Mr. Ferreira, the Head of Psychology at the Cooper's Company and Coburn School. In this video, I'm going to introduce the department and talk through the A-Level Psychology. Firstly, two teachers of psychology at the school, Mrs. Harries and Mr. Ferreira. We've taught together for over 10 years and we know the subject incredibly well and we work well together as a team. If you do psychology at the Cooper's Company Coburn School, you'll be taught by both Mary's and myself as we share the topics between us. The topics that you'll do in A-Level Psychology follow a structure of Year 1 and Year 2, and we complete the Year 1 content in the first year. However, we do not do the AS exam, and therefore we teach the Year 1 content as if you're sitting your A-Level exam at the end of the 2 years. The topics, as you can see, are social psychology, memory, attachment, psychopathology, approaches, and research methods. These are very interesting kind of introductions to the subject, and you'll find them incredibly interesting. What we will notice is that each method is covered over the 2 years. There's content for Year 1 and content for Year 2, and it does get more difficult. It's important that you're comfortable with the research methods because psychology is seen as an A-level science and has to have the minimum 10% mathematics in the exam, and there has to be a certain requirement to get the science specification. We also finish the Year 1 content by the summer term, and we move into the Year 2 content, starting with biopsychology and in the summer term. The topics covered in Year 2 are biopsychology and issues and debates, and then we see the 3 choices of relationships, eating behavior, addiction. These are topics that you would have a choice to teach, and we will teach these 3. Other schools may have chosen other topics to teach, and this is usually done by looking at the teacher expertise and experience. Ms. Harris and I had lots of experience teaching relationships, behavior, addiction, and therefore we are continuing to teach these particular topics. An example of the other topics that some other colleges and schools will teach will be topics such as schizophrenia, which is very popular, very interesting, but we have chosen eating behavior because of our experience with that particular topic. Likewise, you might find a number of schools teaching relationships, and a popular choice is gender. And in the addiction topic, we have a lot of schools teach forensic psychology. I'm an examiner for AQA, and specifically for paper 3, where you'll have relationships, eating behavior, and addiction in it. And I firmly believe that we have made a very sensible decision. However, I do believe I need to be open with you, and if you have your heart set on doing forensics or your heart set on doing schizophrenia, then you perhaps need to look at other schools. I hope you enjoyed just a very brief introduction to the department. This is all that I'm going to talk about in this introduction video. What I have to follow are 2 other videos, which are a brief introduction to the topic of social psychology, which I'm sure you'll find interesting as well. Thank you for listening.
Mr. Ferreira, and I'm going to talk you through a social psychology lesson. This is not going to be a typical lesson because I'm not standing in front of you, and also because if I was, we wouldn't be able to do things exactly how I would normally do in a lesson. You need to kind of be patient with me and appreciate that this is just an opportunity for you to see a little bit about psychology and perhaps look at a topic that is really interesting, and we take it from there. Now, the topic I decided to work on is the Stanford Prison Experiment. This is a very famous study, and if you look, the study took place in 1971, and yet we're still looking at it now. So therefore, it has stood the test of time. 3 people responsible for the study are Haney, Banks, and Zimbardo, but for many people, this is seen as a major study for Zimbardo. So let's get into the start of the study. It starts on a quiet Sunday morning. Imagine what it would be like if you're sleeping, maybe sleeping late. Next, there's a knock on the door. we see here is that California police officers come into this quiet kind of suburb of Palo Alto and they arrest a number of men. The men have been arrested for armed. They are picked up at the home. They're warned of the legal rights, spread-eagled against the car, searched. Okay, now of course the neighbors would find this really interesting. To give you a taste of what this is like, I have a short video for you.
The car pulls up in front. The cop comes to the front door, knocks, and says he's looking for me. So they, right there, they took me out the door. They put my hands against the car. It was a real cop car. It was a real policeman, and there were real neighbors in the street who didn't know that this was an experiment.
As you can see, it would be quite interesting. You're seeing somebody getting arrested. You don't know what they've done. But of course, the person who was being arrested knew what he had done. What he had done is that he had answered an ad in the newspaper. But before we get to that, how would you feel if police turned to your house and attempted? What would your parents say? So with psychology, sometimes we have to find about what's going on in a person's mind. We could say there's been a number of things happening in America that just question police procedures. Police use certain tactics in order to make sure that the person is confused, is potentially taken surprised and not able to resist. Okay, and there's a word there called dehumanize. Now, of course, this could be taken to the extreme, and I hope all of you recognize this particular image. And it's really sad to think that these days that we're still dealing with institutional racism and problems like that within society. And as I said, all that these particular young men had done volunteer. Okay, now in a class might readily answer if I had to ask you a question. What they had done is that they had seen, you can see here, a college student needed for a study of prison life. Okay, and they responded to this particular ad. Now this is really interesting because it is a volunteer sample, so we do worry about how people would volunteer for something like that. However, what we do find is that Zimbardo and team were very good at trying to figure out that they had the right person there. So we see in red there, it says diagnostic interviews and personality tests were given. They needed to make sure that those people on their study didn't have psychological problems. Now we'll see in terms of research methods, this is important because what we don't want is people to say, oh, the reason that the experiment didn't work out, the reason that it did work was because these particular individuals had a tough psychology. What did happen is that they ultimately whittled down all the applicants down to 24 college students, and they offered to pay them $15 a day. Now that led to about $100, which is probably about 90 or so, or actually a bit more than that, maybe 110 pounds a day. We've had a nice sum of money. What Zimbardo and his team, Banks and his did, they built it within the psychology department of the Stanford Psychology Department. Now, Stanford Psychology is slightly different from the other universities, in that they're very proud of their psychology department, and it was one building up front and everyone could see it. The psychology departments around the country were kind of hidden base and kind of not very nice, but they built this amazing prison inside the basement of the psychology building. I did film, and there's lots of footage, and I'm going to show you some of the footage. What I don't quite get sometimes is why the footage was of such poor quality. However, the technology has changed quite dramatically between then and now, and I'm overestimating the equipment at the time. We also see that they try to mimic much of a principle. Now, what we do know is that the prisoners wore a specific uniform. They were expected to wear sunglasses. And when we do this as a lesson, I don't know why that's important. We also see that the prisoners were dressed in quite a humiliating way and very clearly dressed in a number. They also had kind of stockings to kind of the head shaven approach, couldn't actually shave their heads. They did wear a chain around their neck. This also once again symbolic to show that they were prisoners rather than people. So my question is, how would this particular experience affect you? Is arresting somebody at their home, putting them in a prison, and monitoring them in a particular way, is it right? So the question I might ask is it ethical? I want you to think about ethics as I show you this next video.
I thought that I was capable of this kind of behavior. I was surprised, I was dismayed to find out that I could really be that I could act in a manner so absolutely unaccustomed to anything I would even really dream of doing. And while I was doing it, I didn't feel any regret. I didn't feel any guilt. It was only afterwards, when I began to reflect on what I had done, that this behavior began to dawn on me, and I realized that this was a part of me that I hadn't really noticed before.
So in this video, you see a guy having experience of being in the Stanford prison experiment. And the thing that comes out from this is how the guard was so surprised that he was even capable of such behavior. Now, of course, this might give some of the story away, that perhaps something didn't quite go right. What did the guards get up to? What did the prisoners get up to? So is it the right thing for us to do, to run research that potentially could challenge people about who they are and what they do? And to finish this off, I'm going to ask you simply to think about, well, what is going to happen? This is the first video, and I'm going to make another video where I'll go into what happened. But what does this mean to you? It says here, what are the effects of living in an environment with no clocks, no view of the outside world, and minimal sensory stimulation? Well, actually, you might have experienced some of this. Over the last 3 to 4 months, you have been asked to stay at home. You've potentially have had very little interaction with people outside of your family. Maybe you live in a small house or a flat where there isn't any way of going outside. And so, well, I've just shown you a video that's in the prison guards. What is torsion and about this handout that you have a kind of find the whole story, which happens if you think about the prison. I hope you enjoyed this video. Looking forward to talking about Stanford. Back to part 2 of the Stanford prison experiment. I left you with thoughts about isolation, what it's like to potentially into a prison. I've showed you a bit about what happens to a guard, and now we're going to look at what is going to happen inside the experiment. So we could go. Now, before we get into exactly what happened in the Stanford prison experiment, I ask the question, how is this study relevant to today, or is it completely irrelevant? Do we have any examples of something like this happening? Now, surprisingly, next time I'm going to show you something which you might have thought of. It's Love Island. I personally have not got into the show, and it's a popular show, and hopefully it will be on our TVs soon. Many of you might have watched, and certainly might have watched this series, Zara Motet. He's a former student of Cooper's and somebody that I taught and got to know well. I was in year 7 and I taught in year 12 and year 13. And after she had out of the show, she came back to the school, had a conversation about kind of how things were going, a conversation about kind of the psychology, because he was the psychology captain in year 13. So she worked with Harry's and I, and we thought that she was really a good example to the department, and she really put a lot of effort into helping us with the displays and kind of being there for us. And he said, well, actually, being in Ireland was like being in a prison. Of course, it was a beautiful prison, and there were lots of things to kind of think that it wasn't, but it really, really was. And kind of get to the head, because she was a prison study, finishing A-level psychology. So maybe when we have these reality shows, we are in some ways kind of forcing people into a situation like the Stanford Prison Experiment. We're doing it for intent rather than try and find something else. Now that's my little distraction. Get on with the actual study. Now what we do is nobody in prison were than anyone else. They were all students. The guards were given no training at all. There were given some recommendations, and there was a set of rules they had to decide before they went into the prison. But most of the time, the guards were there making their own rules. So, of course, what can go wrong? In some ways, the best way for me to illustrate this is actually to show you a trailer of a film came out a number ago. Now, of course, this is a film where they do kind of shock. The shocking thing about it is many of the things in the film may actually be true. So let's have a look. Trailer.
Would you rather be a prisoner?
I don't think I have the qualities to be a guard.
Prisoner, I guess. Prisoner sounds like you do less work. What's that? Nobody likes us. Good afternoon, gentlemen. This experiment will be invention my research into the effects prisons can have on human behavior. You're going to be pleased to know that you all have been chosen to be the prison guards. But no circumstances whatsoever are you to physically assault the prisoners in any way. So remember, just as you were watching the prisoners, my staff will be watching you.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to have ourselves an Rule number 1, prisoners must remain silent.
This is an exercise period.
Okay, it's just me. He's getting a bit too slow.
Why don't you give me 20 push-ups?
Look at this guy. Thinks he's John Wayne or something.
You address me as Mr. Correctional Officer. This might be an interesting 2 weeks after all.
Why don't you make up your bunk, 8612?
I did. Correction.
Well, that's not what I see.
Hey, what are you doing to me now?
Man,
It's in him. You're not supposed to hit him.
step in? No. Let the guards figure it out. Let's see where it goes.
Good evening. How do we make this one a night to remember?
It's all real. They won't let you go.
won't let us leave.
Those are not subjects. Those are boys, and you are harming them.
Thought you were gonna get some time in the yard? What you thought this was gonna be? I don't want to be able to turn out this way.
As you can see, the film is certainly interesting. I can't say that nobody was in the actual experiment, but that would have been one of the rules that we would have done as a pathologist to make sure that nobody does get harmed. But what I really like about the film is that it shows and portrays Dr. Zimbardo brilliantly. Having met a man is really brilliant. It also gives you kind of a hint of all the different things that kind of happened. So certainly I would recommend that you watch the film if you can. I'm going to move on to the film and show you a few other things. As you saw, that there was a particular guard, they called him John Wayne. They saw him as being particularly cool. In an interview afterwards, he did actually talk about him playing a role where he said he was acting like a character played for a John Wayne film called a film called Cool Hand Luke. Okay, and so this particular clip is showing you the reality, and you see it's very similar to what we've seen in the.
Well, gentlemen, here it is time for count.
At 2:30 a.m., prisoners were awakened from their sleep by the night guard shift for their count. They were told to routinely perform counts to familiarize the prisoners with their numbers and determine that the present accounted for. But more important, it provided a regular occasion for the guards to interact with and exercise control over the prison. There were some counts every day and night.
Recently, implying us that prison life was prison life. Of course, Zimbabwe and the crew were making sure that there was regular interaction with prisoners and the prison guards. In the next video, what we see is probably what was expected. It was the prisoners who rebelled.
Incident, which broke out on the morning second day. For the 10th count, the morning guard shift found that the prisoners in cell number 1 had removed, stripped off their numbers, and barricaded themselves inside the cells, their heads against the door. Pawned to push the guard in their face. This, of course, embarrassed and upset guards. The morning shift called up guards and put down rebellion.
See that the prisoners were fit, and it kind of common like kind of we like now, but certainly the guards responded kind of very heavily. I decided to use psychological tactics to prisoners from something like kind of a where they made some people to be special and other people out not to be special. They put people in the hole, which is basically a solitary confinement area, and they used all the kind of normal kind of prison tactics which you would normally have. It was actually a former convict who was on the project, and he felt that actually he did get the prison done really well. So the question might actually be, why did the prisoners just leave? Because a psychology experiment, a real prison. Well, I'm going to show you another in a moment. After we have a chance to have a look at this about prisoners, after thinking, instead of prisoners being randomly chosen, maybe what happened was that Zimbardo's team had actually caused this to be the case, that the weaker people were the prisoners and stronger people were the prisoners. But why would this actually happen? Maybe the psychology of the prison actually getting to the prisoners, and this next video does highlight that really.
That I felt that, well, it was really, and I don't know, I just, no way I could have, I just felt totally helpless, more helpless than I felt before.
Now, we do have this topic in the course. We'll see that this is quite interesting, that they have been told that he can't leave, because ethics of any experiment is that participants have the right to withdraw. In other words, they can pull out of the experiment and they can pull the data with them. However, this prisoner certainly has expressed he didn't feel that they could leave. And as such, maybe something wasn't right about the prison. Now, thinking of what's right, what is the experiment, let me point to you. Zimbardo, very important kind of goes on to be psychology. He was the investigator, so the person trying out to make knowledge less. And he also played a role. These two roles is the involves clash. Is this okay? And the next bit, what role should he should he be the superintendent? So look at
As soon as I rushed, what I found lying hysterically, while in the background his fellow prisoners were yelling the prisoner, and that they were being
So what we is that Dr. Zimbardo is admitting that he saw this person kind of broken and crying, and his response as the investigator is that I need to get this person out of the prison. But were other prisoners saying? Prisoner 819 had done a bad thing, and their boys crying, I need to go back to prison to show them I'm a prisoner. Now, what has happened is that the prison continued for weeks and weeks. This was at the end. This was at the end. They found, and it's very small. And the experiment was actually called. And Zimbardo did stop the experiment. He does it because challenged. He's feared. This is she doesn't want to be with them. Can actually treating their human beings. They have a very important journey into the prison. I'm not going to talk. It's not going to be exactly the same as the lesson. I'm a lot more animated in real. I kind of like to ask questions, and I like you to ask me questions. But it does give you a good taste of a bit about what psychology is. Yes, there are some unknowns, things we don't know, things we have to ask the question and leave it as a big question there that we don't know the answer to. Now, if you have found this interesting, there are other places in which you can find information on this particular study, some of which are put on the Google Drive for you to have a look at. But so we know that, let me go to the slides, that Dr. Zimbardo has spoken at TED Talks, a conference where he's spoken, and there's plenty of engaged with him. So you can see, for example, YouTube, you're going to get and later so, and the task us through and that you answer the questions. It's interesting. If you have any email, I'll make it back to you. And I hope that of later the